So it's 1975, and Elvis has to fulfill some contractual obligations with RCA, and they do manage to get him into the recording studio to record a handful of tracks that eventually comprised this next album, the 55th album in the RCA Albums collection. But he was not a fan of the recording process, and in fact these turned out to be the last studio, like actually in a recording studio, recordings that he ever made in his life, which it's Elvis today. And much like Promised Land, even more so than Promised Land, this album has really taken me by surprise. Not necessarily this listen through, when the Legacy Edition came out. This is another album that I really hadn't paid attention to before. Not that I thought that there was anything wrong with it, and certainly there were songs on there that I had already appreciated from other compilations, like Trouble, which Travis Tritt later, that was his, almost like his first major single, was a cover of that. Green, Green Grass of Home, and Fairy Tale, which is a Pointer Sisters song, believe it or not. Which is weird for me. When I found that out, I had always known the Pointer Sisters from the soundtrack of Beverly Hills Cop, doing the Neutron Dance, and that they really, like, I always assumed that was their style of music, and it was. I found out it was very much that sort of pop, Motown, soul sort of sound, but they did have just a straight up country music song with Fairy Tale, and it definitely resonated with Elvis, and he recorded a version of it. Coincidentally, I had apparently, until the Legacy Edition of this came out, had never heard the master version of Fairy Tale. I have a compilation of country songs. It's Elvis Great Country Songs, and it has an alternate take of Fairy Tale without all the overdubbed strings and all the additional instrumentation. And so I was always under the assumption that was basically how the master sounded too. And so I stuck the Legacy Edition into my stereo and was listening to these songs, and then Fairy Tale comes on, and I'm like, wait, what? What? This is a new thing. But this is a country album, and this arguably a more country album than Elvis Country, because this was a contemporary country album. But you wouldn't know that by looking at this cover. And Elvis was having quite a bit of success in the mid to late 70s as a country artist on the country charts. And I think he would have been even bigger if the record company, if RCA and the Colonel had, and I think had he lived, they probably would have actually kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They would have kind of taken those reins and ran with it. They would have recognized that he was becoming a country music artist, and they would have started marketing him hard at the country genre. And I think he would have been right up there in the 80s. And in fact, he was. In 1980, he had a number one hit with Guitar Man, which was a remake. But here's my problem with, now that we're at the end of these, with the whole marketing thing. And I pulled all these out, and I in fact pulled out other ones from the previous episode, starting with today. I just want you to see if there's a common theme on these albums. In the 70s, this is what you would have seen at the record store if you were going to go buy Elvis albums. Whether it was a new country music album, whether it was a live recording, whether it was movie soundtrack material, or just look at these. They all look the same. It's just Elvis. The word Elvis, whatever the title was, usually just a song, and him against a black background. Talk about creating marketplace confusion. The logic that I've heard was that during the 70s, they found out that Elvis's live recordings sold better. So like Madison Square Garden or the Memphis recording and Aloha from Hawaii sold better in the short term compared to Elvis's studio stuff, his contemporary studio stuff, whether that was today or even like his gospel stuff. And so no matter what album they released, they started this trend of putting that on whatever album was coming out, thinking that they could basically trick people into thinking that it was a live album, even though some of these songs go back to the early 60s from the movies. And I really do think it hurt his career. I understand the logic why they did that. You can have some very you can have some savvy businessmen who make some pretty stupid mistakes in any industry. If they see one trend that sticks out to them as far as the numbers are concerned, they'll run with it, and unfortunately, sometimes it actually ends up being a detriment, because when you don't know whether you're getting movies or new music, are you even going to bother buying Elvis music? Obviously, if you're a hardcore fan, of course you are. If you're a collector, of course you are. But this is really frustrating, looking back in this box set and actually seeing. And there's one really bad one that I mentioned before. I don't have a copy of it, but they re-released Frankie and Johnny on the Pickwick label, which was kind of another budget label, kind of like Camden. And while these are guilty of the crime of having, not being able to distinguish between 60s and 70s stuff, at least these tried to present something new. These recordings were appearing on an LP for the first time ever. They straight up re-released Frankie and Johnny, no track list difference. It was the soundtrack from the movie, just like it had been released in the 60s. And they used a picture of Elvis in a white jumpsuit against a black background. And at that point, the record company is just like, you wonder whether they cared. And I don't think they did. I think most fans would agree that it's pretty obvious that there were a couple points in his career, both while he was alive and after he passed away, that they really didn't care about the way that he was being marketed. There's a story that when Elvis's catalog was taken over by BMG in the 90s or 80s, and Ernst Jorgensen started working for them, and started working on the Elvis canon, I guess you would call. That the line was that that the only people who bought Elvis records were middle-aged housewives from the South who wouldn't spend more than like $5 on an Elvis album, and so that was the only demographic that they aimed for. And boy, am I glad that that has changed. That something like this, this box set collection, could be released today and be appreciated, even album by album, by someone who's clearly not a middle-aged Southern housewife. It's nice. And looking back on all this makes me really grateful to be an Elvis fan now, so I can actually look at this with some perspective. So that's Elvis today. I had a lot to say about other things. As far as this album is concerned, though, it's quite a good country music album. I would say give it a shot. Go in with an open mind. I think you'll find there's songs on this that you will like. A few that you might not. The song "Woman Without Love" does not hold up at all. It's a bad song. But the rest of the album's pretty good. So that's Elvis today.